Welcome to the debate. When we picture a hospital emergency room, there's an almost sacred assumption built into the architecture itself.
Oh, absolutely. We expect that glowing red emergency sign shining in the night to represent an unbroken promise, right?
Right, an open door, immediate sanctuary. But when you step into the actual high-stakes logistics of modern healthcare, you realize that those doors aren't always open.
Which is a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. Today we are looking at the operational reality of ambulance diversion. Simply put, this is a formal request made by a hospital asking that incoming emergency ambulances go somewhere else.
Right.
Our entire discussion today is grounded in a deeply detailed 2022 medical presentation by Dr. Christopher Kahn, which lays out exactly how this practice impacts the acute care system. But before we get into whether this is a good or bad thing, we need to make sure we are speaking the same language.
That's crucial, because the terminology gets confusing fast. So you have ambulance diversion, which you just mentioned.
Yes.
That's the hospital actively telling the regional dispatch center, we are over capacity, please route emergency traffic away from us. But that's completely different from ambulance bypass.
Right. Bypass is a decision made in the field. That's the paramedic crew in the back of the rig saying, we have a severe trauma patient, we are skipping the closest community hospital and driving an extra 10 minutes to the major trauma center.
Right, that makes sense.
That's bypass. Diversion, on the other hand, is initiated by the facility.
Exactly. And the real question is why a facility initiates diversion. This brings us to two concepts that are often conflated, crowding and access block.
Let's break that down.
So crowding is exactly what it sounds like. It's when the sheer volume of patients needing emergency care exceeds the facility's physical or staffing capacity to treat them in a timely manner. The waiting room is full.
Right.
But access block is a very specific and, I would argue, much more dangerous mechanical failure.
Let's explain that for the listener. What does access block actually look like on the floor of the ER?
Well, access block happens when a patient arrives at the emergency department, gets evaluated by the doctor, gets treated, and the decision is made to admit them to the main hospital for a few days. They are officially an inpatient.
Okay, so they're admitted.
Yes, but they cannot physically move upstairs because the main hospital is entirely full. Every single bed is taken.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that patient just sits there. They become what we call boarded in the emergency department, taking up a critical ER bed for hours, sometimes days, just waiting for a room to open up upstairs.
And that distinction right there is the foundation of our entire disagreement today.
It is.
Is ambulance diversion a fundamentally flawed practice that simply masks that systemic access block while actively harming patients? Or is it an essential, rational safety valve for an overwhelmed hospital?
Right.
I mean, I look at Dr. Kahn's material, and I see that ambulance diversion is an ineffective tool. It exacerbates health inequities, it doesn't solve the underlying problem, and it should be severely restricted if not eliminated entirely.
And looking at that exact same material, I see a totally different reality. Diversion is certainly an imperfect tool. Nobody denies that. But it is a necessary mechanism to manage localized critical surges in a broader health system that is stretched to its absolute limits.
But is it necessary, really?
I think it is. Until we fix the underlying capacity limits of our hospitals, stripping emergency departments of this vital safety valve invites catastrophic failure.
Look, let's start with the root cause, because I think the data tells a very clear story about what ambulance diversion actually is.
Okay.
It is almost entirely a symptom of a larger systemic failure, specifically that access block you just described. It is not a primary problem with the emergency department itself. The ER is just the intake point.
I'm following you.
To really understand this, we have to look at a massive study in the material covering a 7-year period from 2005 to 2012.
Ah, the volume study.
Yes. The researchers looked at what actually causes a hospital to go on diversion. If the problem was just too many ambulances, you'd expect emergency department volume to drive diversion.
Sure.
But that's not what happened. They found that a 10% increase in ER patient volume barely moved the needle. It only led to a tiny 0.7% increase in diversion hours,
Right, but
but a 10% increase in inpatient volume, meaning the main hospital upstairs filling up, led to a 5.0% spike in ambulance diversion hours. That is a 7-fold higher impact.
well, yeah, because the bottleneck isn't the front door. The bottleneck is the exit out of the ER into the main hospital.
Exactly. I like to think of the hospital as a sink. Diversion is the equivalent of turning off the faucet because the drain is clogged,
Okay, I see the analogy.
right? It punishes the intake point, the ambulances carrying acutely ill patients, for a throughput problem caused by a lack of beds upstairs. It doesn't actually fix the clogged drain, it just forces the water to spill out somewhere else.
I mean, yes.
And what really troubles me is who gets caught in that spillover. When we look at the operational data, this practice inherently harms vulnerable populations.
You're referring to the 2007 demographic data?
I am. Research evaluating over 200 California hospitals showed that facilities serving a high proportion of minority patients were on diversion 4.1 times as often as those with low proportions.
Wow.
Yeah. We aren't just talking about a logistical quirk here. We are talking about a systemic failure that disproportionately shuts the door on marginalized communities because their local safety net hospitals are chronically gridlocked.
Look, I don't disagree that the demographic disparity is alarming, but we have to look at why those specific hospitals are gridlocked. I mean, I understand the appeal of your clogged drain analogy, but let's follow that logic through to its actual operational reality.
Okay, let's do it.
Yes, the drain is clogged. But if you take away the ability to turn off the faucet, the sink doesn't just drain slowly, it overflows entirely.
But shouldn't we focus on unclogging the drain?
In a perfect world, yes. But in the real world, an overflowing emergency department is a deadly environment. You have nurses managing 3 times their safe ratio. You have critical lab results getting delayed.
Right, it's chaos.
And unsafe facility to ensure those patients get prompt access to care somewhere else in the region.
Wait, but does the data actually show that those hospitals are just overburdened? Or are they failing to manage their flow?
The data strongly suggests they are operating at maximum capacity, not failing at management. Look at the types of facilities that go on diversion most frequently.
Safety net hospitals?
Right, and specialized facilities. Places providing major trauma care, burn units, cardiovascular surgery. A study spanning 1998 to 2004 in Los Angeles County showed that county-operated hospitals spent 150 more hours on diversion a month compared to private community hospitals. Trauma centers spent 48 more hours a month.
Well, because they are the only places capable of taking those specific patients.
Exactly. These aren't hospitals that are mismanaging their internal flow. These are hospitals operating at the absolute razor's edge of their capacity. And if you want proof of that, look at the financial reality highlighted in Dr. Khan's source material.
The profitability metric.
Yes. There was a study of an urban academic hospital showing that their profitability actually increased during diversion periods. We're talking up to $119,000 a week higher during severe diversion.
Hold on. They make more money when they tell patients to go away? That sounds incredibly counterintuitive.
I know, it really does. And another study in Pennsylvania pointed out the massive potential revenue lost when ambulances are turned away. So it's not about hospital greed.
What is it about then?
What that profitability metric indicates is that these facilities are successfully operating at their absolute maximum utilization limits. Every single bed is full, every single operating room is booked, every single nurse is deployed.
Operating at 100%?
Yes. When a hospital is 100% full, it is highly financially efficient, but it has zero surge capacity left. Banning diversion in that moment doesn't force efficiency. It breaks the machine.
You're arguing that diversion is this rational, load-leveling tool that distributes patients safely. But the mechanics of how it actually plays out in the real world show it functions much more like a contagion.
Wait, a contagion? What do you mean?
Yes, like a virus. It spreads. When one hospital goes on diversion, it doesn't gracefully distribute its patients to a well-rested facility down the street. It triggers a domino effect.
Okay, I see.
The data in the material shows that when the next closest ER goes on diversion, your hospital's chance of going on diversion increases by up to 21%.
Right, the bouncing effect.
Right. Let's picture this on a Friday night. Hospital A gets overwhelmed and calls dispatch to say, "We're on diversion." So dispatch routes the next 6 ambulances to Hospital B across town.
Which is probably already busy.
Exactly. Hospital B, which was already busy, suddenly gets swamped by a massive influx they weren't expecting. The charge nurse panics, and Hospital B declares diversion. Now the ambulances bounce back to Hospital A or spill over to Hospital C.
It's a cascade.
It causes absolute chaos for the pre-hospital paramedics. They are driving around in circles. That isn't a rational leveling of the regional load, it's a structural panic attack.
Look, I completely acknowledge that the domino effect is a real risk in an unmanaged system. The bouncing ambulances scenario you described definitely happens, but you're describing a failure of regional coordination, not a fundamental flaw in the concept of load leveling.
How do you coordinate a system where no one has any beds?
Through central monitoring, you don't leave it up to individual charge nurses panicking in isolation. Look at the Baltimore trial conducted between 2013 and 2014. They took a senior EMS paramedic and physically placed them directly in the Fire Communications Bureau, 12 hours a day.
Like an air traffic controller for ambulances?
Exactly like an air traffic controller. They empowered this senior paramedic to suggest alternative hospital destinations based on a real-time regional dashboard monitoring delays across the whole city.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they could see the surges happening before the hospitals even felt them. And the result of that coordination, they saw a decrease in at-hospital turnaround time, meaning ambulances got back on the street faster by over 4.5 minutes.
That's significant.
Very. And they saw a massive drop of 1,723 hours in hospital alert times over just a 3-month period. When you have a central dashboard, you route traffic to where there is actual verified capacity. You completely bypass that chaotic oscillation you're worried about.
Okay, I see the logic there, but let's really think about what that Baltimore trial represents. It represents spending massive resources to build a better crutch.
A crutch?
Yes, we don't need a senior paramedic playing air traffic controller for a broken system. We need to force the system itself to adapt. And we have empirical proof that you can just do that. Let's look at the 2009 Massachusetts statewide ban.
The outright ban on the practice.
Yes.
The state simply eliminated ambulance diversion. They told hospitals, you can no longer do this. Figure it out.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that. And what happened? The sky didn't fall. The data evaluating the Boston emergency departments showed absolutely no increase in ER crowding. None.
Really? None at all?
None. Ambulance turnaround time actually decreased slightly by 2 to 3 minutes. And this is the most crucial part. Those hospitals that had historically been high diverters actually decreased their emergency department length of stay by about 10 minutes.
Okay, let me stop you there. I have to admit, that statistic has always puzzled me. How does a hospital's length of stay decrease when they are legally forced to take on more ambulance patients? Because it changes the psychology and the operations of the entire hospital. Think about the sink again. When you remove the safety valve of diversion, the hospital administration can no longer ignore the clogged drain.
Right.
The ER doctors can no longer just hit a button and make the ambulances go away. So what do? They have to implement active bed management.
Meaning what, practically?
Practically, it means the hospital CEO gets involved. It means the inpatient floors upstairs are forced to accept patients earlier in the day. It means discharging patients before noon instead of waiting until 5 p.m.
Getting them out the door.
Exactly. It sometimes means placing admitted patients in upstairs hallways to share the burden of boarding, rather than leaving them all stacked up in the ER. We saw the exact same behavioral shift with the Sacramento 3-2-1 plan between 2006 and 2009.
The ratcheting down strategy.
Right. They didn't ban it outright initially. They placed incredibly tight, uncomfortable criteria on it. They told hospitals, you can go on diversion for 3 hours, but then you are forced to open for an hour. Then they ratcheted the limit down to 2 hours, then 1 hour.
So it broke the habit.
Yes. It resulted in an 87.4% decrease in diversion hours. It basically vanished.
But did the volume go down? I mean, fewer patients?
That's the kicker. During that exact same period, overall ER census went up 13% and hospital admissions went up 6.6%. Sacramento hospitals absorbed significantly more patients while nearly eliminating their use of diversion.
That is impressive.
They didn't need diversion. They needed operational discipline. When you take away the crutch, the hospital learns how to walk again.
Look, I think that's a brilliant theoretical framework, but I strongly push back on the idea that this is just about operational discipline.
Why?
Because while the Massachusetts ban and the Sacramento behavioral forcing functions are undeniably interesting case studies, we cannot assume that all regions and all healthcare ecosystems behave the same way under pressure.
Why wouldn't they? If you force the throughput happens.
Because you can't force throughput if the downstream resources literally do not exist. Consider the 2020 San Francisco trial. They attempted something very similar. They implemented a centrally monitored diversion system where a paramedic supervisor and a base hospital physician determined destinations for non-critical patients.
Right, to smooth things out.
Exactly. The goal was to smooth things out. The load leveling improved slightly across the city, but overall diversion hours actually increased.
Well, because they still allowed diversion.
But it highlights a deeper reality. It remains deeply unclear in the literature. If pre-hospital patient volume, the actual number of ambulances rolling up to the doors, meaningfully affects a hospital's internal decision to divert.
I see.
Removing the diversion option in regions that do not have massive alternative infrastructure or flexible inpatient staffing doesn't force operational discipline. It just traps patients in failing environments.
Traps them?
Yes. A mandate without the resources to back it up is just a recipe for gridlock. You can tell a hospital to discharge patients faster, but if there are no skilled nursing facilities in the county with open beds to take those discharged patients, they stay in the hospital.
A recipe for gridlock? I think we need to talk about what the current system is a recipe for.
Okay.
We've been talking about operational efficiency, but we need to center this debate on patient outcomes. I want to lean into the most severe data presented in Dr. Khan's material, because it is staggering. High ambulance diversion is directly correlated with mortality.
You're referring to the acute myocardial infarction data, the heart attacks.
Yes. A major study looking at acute myocardial infarctions in New York City found a direct, significant association between increasing diversion hours and increasing AMI-related deaths.
Right.
They calculated it represented about 84 excess deaths annually. We know that with heart attacks, time is muscle. Every minute an ambulance spends driving past the closest hospital to get to a facility that isn't on diversion, heart tissue is dying.
Look, I don't dispute the severity of that, but that is a highly specific, localized metric in one dense urban environment.
But it highlights a deadly mechanical trend. And let's return to the demographic disparity we mentioned earlier, because the mortality data gets worse.
Okay.
Research using a national database from 2001 to 2011 showed that Black heart attack patients had up to a 3.09% higher one-year mortality rate when they were exposed to higher levels of ambulance diversion in their communities.
That is sobering.
It is. We aren't just debating logistics here, we are debating the mechanics of a system that produces lethal outcomes based on geography. When you defend the practice of diversion, you are inherently defending a mechanism that measurably increases a patient's risk of dying from a heart attack because the doors to their local hospital were locked.
I understand.
The human cost of this safety valve is just entirely unacceptable.
That is a very compelling argument. The data on mortality it's hard to hear. But let me ask you to consider the underlying mechanism of that mortality. What is actually causing those excess deaths?
I would argue it's the delay in care.
Is it the fact that the ambulance had to drive an extra 5 to 10 minutes to a different facility? Or is it the underlying crowding itself?
Definitely the delay.
But the data points heavily to the crowding. Let's look at the massive 2007 California study in the material. This involved nearly 1 million emergency department visits that resulted in the patient being admitted.
The one evaluating inpatient outcomes?
Yes. It showed that patients admitted on days with high ER crowding experienced a 5% greater chance of inpatient death.
Wait, a 5% increase just because the ER was busy when they arrived?
Exactly.
That equated to 300 excess inpatient deaths, 6,200 excess hospital days, and $17 million in excess costs. The crowding is the killer. The access block is the killer.
But
When the ER is gridlocked, mistakes happen. Antibiotics are delayed. Vitals aren't checked as frequently. If a hospital is already statistically in a red zone where every single admitted patient is 5% more likely to die because the staff is stretched beyond human limits, accepting more critical ambulance patients into that exact same environment without the option to divert could theoretically worsen outcomes for everyone.
But you're assuming the diverted hospital provides worse care than the ambulance ride.
No, I'm looking at the statistical danger of a crowded room. You are looking at the mortality associated with diversion and blaming the diversion. I am arguing that the diversion is just a flare going up in the night sky.
A flare.
Yes, it's an indicator that the hospital is actively in a dangerous, lethal state of crowding. Shoving another acute heart attack patient into a maxed out, dangerous ER might actually be worse than driving 5 more minutes down the road to a facility with an open trauma bay.
But that brings us right back to my fundamental point. If the crowding is the killer and the access block is the killer, we have to fix the crowding. Agreed. And the best available evidence, summarizing our core positions here today, shows that ambulance traffic is not a significant contributor to ER crowding. The input is not the problem.
It's part of it.
By allowing hospitals to use ambulance diversion, we give administrators a convenient out. We allow them to point to the ambulance bay and say, there's the problem, when the real problem is the lack of inpatient bed management upstairs. The data from Massachusetts and Sacramento proves that diversion can be eliminated. And when it is, throughput improves and the system is forced to actually function.
And my position remains that until those deeper structural issues, the inpatient access block, the total health system capacity, the regional nursing shortages are actually solved, stripping emergency departments of their ability to divert is a premature and dangerous risk.
You can't just fix it overnight.
Right. You can't just mandate efficiency. You cannot take away the crutch before you heal the broken leg. We need comprehensive central monitoring, we need better regional distribution, and we need massively expanded inpatient capacity before we permanently lock the doors open and force our frontline emergency teams to absorb unlimited, unmanageable volume.
Well, despite our deep disagreement on whether to ban or preserve this practice, it seems we converge unequivocally on the final conclusion presented in Dr. Kahn's material. Emergency department crowding is a very real, incredibly dangerous problem with severe consequences for patient safety.
Absolutely. I mean, the literature review is perfectly clear on that. The consequences of ER crowding include delayed assessment, non-adherence to best practice guidelines, massive increased staff stress, and ultimately increased mortality.
Yeah.
Successfully addressing it is going to require a massive systems-based approach.
Right. We're looking at a system that spans everything from primary care access,
Which prevents the emergency in the first place.
exactly,
From primary care access to active bed management and mandated patient disposition targets on the inpatient side. Tweaking the input mechanisms at the ambulance bay is only ever going to be a fraction of the solution.
It is a vast ecosystem, and when one part of an ecosystem like inpatient bed availability is pushed to its absolute limit, the entire network feels the shockwave.
It is remarkable to reflect on how analyzing something as seemingly straightforward as an ambulance turning its wheels away from one hospital and toward another reveals the profound interconnectedness of modern acute care.
It really does. Every single bed, every single nurse, and every single policy choice in a hospital affects the entire region's capacity to save a life. To our listeners, the underlying complexities of healthcare logistics found in this source material go far deeper than what we can cover today.
Absolutely.
There is an entire world of data out there regarding throughput, alternative admission policies, and centralized dispatching that warrants your exploration. We leave you today without declaring a winner in this debate, allowing you to weigh the systemic safety of a pressure release valve against the human cost of turning a patient away.
It is a profound operational balance that healthcare workers face every single day.
Because at the end of the day, when that red emergency sign is shining in the night, we have to ask ourselves, is the promise of an open door just an illusion if the hallways behind it are already gridlocked? Thank you for listening.